03:12 a.m. local time, Northern Caribbean Sea. Above the surface, the night looks harmless. The ocean is dark and smooth, the sky empty of moonlight, and the carrier strike group moves through it like a silent machine. From the flight deck of USS George Washington, there's nothing to suggest tension. No aircraft moving, no deck lights blazing, just a vast black horizon and the steady rhythm of steel cutting water. The escorts hold formation at measured distances, close enough to protect, far enough to maneuver. Radar returns are clean. Surface traffic is minimal. It's the kind of night that feels routine, and that's exactly when the ocean tends to hide the most. Deep inside the ship, the carrier's undersea watch runs without drama. Consoles glow softly in the combat direction center. Sonar displays scroll with the usual signatures. Faint merchant noise far away. The low rumble of distant engines. The constant hiss of ocean life, and the layered acoustics of warm Caribbean water. Everything is normal until it isn't. At 03:16 a.m., a sonar operator notices a faint line behaving too cleanly. Not loud, not obvious, just consistent. A whisper near the edge of the passive detection envelope. Too controlled to be biology, too steady to be random drift. It doesn't approach fast. It doesn't transmit. It doesn't announce itself. It simply holds a depth and keeps pace. That's what triggers the first shift. Not an alarm, not a ship-wide call, a posture change. Heads tilt closer to the screen. Watch supervisors lean in. Someone quietly asks for a second verification. Another operator checks the baseline. The contact remains. Still faint, still disciplined, still matching the carrier strike group's movement just enough to make coincidence impossible. At 03:18 a.m., the track is marked as a possible undersea contact, passive only. No active sonar. Not yet. Active sonar is clarity, but it's also a broadcast. A pulse doesn't just illuminate the water, it announces the presence, the seriousness, and the capability of the force sending it. In waters like these, someone is always listening, and if the U.S. Navy pings without reason, it can turn a quiet transit into an international event. So the strike group does what professional navies do best. It waits, it listens, and it builds a picture from silence. At 03:21 a.m., the contact's behavior sharpens the suspicion. The trace doesn't wander the way ocean noise wanders. It makes micro-corrections, tiny bearing adjustments that keep it aligned with the strike group's movement. Not chasing, not fleeing, shadowing. A submarine that wants to stay hidden breaks contact. A submarine preparing to attack closes aggressively and maneuvers unpredictably. But a submarine that wants to observe, timings, thresholds, reactions, does exactly this. Close enough to learn, far enough to deny intent. At 03:24 a.m., the carrier's team runs quiet modeling. If the contact continues on its present vector, it will drift into a zone where decision time compresses, not because the U.S. needs to shoot, but because the U.S. needs to know. And then, the ocean adds a second voice. At 03:27 a.m., another faint trace appears. Different bearing, similar discipline, similar quiet. For a moment, the room doesn't speak. It doesn't need to. Two undersea contacts behaving like that near a carrier group isn't common. It's a message. The watch team remains procedural. Tracks are logged. Parameters are recorded. Confidence levels are updated carefully, because in undersea warfare, certainty is rare and mistakes are expensive. The carrier maintains course. Speed remains steady. Above the surface, nothing changes. That is deliberate. A carrier strike group doesn't advertise its worry. It uses calm as camouflage. At 03:31 a.m., the second contact corrects bearing by degrees so small it would be invisible to anyone not staring at the ocean through instruments. But underwater, those degrees are language. It's shaping position relative to the strike group. The first contact holds depth near a thermal boundary. A smart move. Thermal layers bend sound, smear signatures, and shorten passive detection ranges. Whoever is below understands the environment. At 03:34 a.m., a third trace appears. 3, not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakable in pattern. 3 quiet undersea contacts, separated in bearing and depth bands, establishing geometry around a carrier strike group like a net being drawn, slowly and carefully, without tugging hard enough to tear. This is not a random coincidence of marine noise. This is controlled positioning. And now the title becomes reality. USS George Washington is not being attacked. It is being surrounded. At 03:36 a.m., the command team receives the undersea update. The language is clipped and factual. Possible diesel-electric signatures, multiple bearings, consistent shadowing behavior, passive only. No active emissions detected from contacts. Diesel-electric matters. These aren't unlimited endurance nuclear boats roaming the globe for weeks. Diesel-electric submarines running on batteries trade speed and endurance for near silence. They are coastal assets. They don't wander far without planning. Battery life is finite. Every minute submerged without snorkeling is a deliberate choice, which means being here, now, is not accidental. At 03:39 a.m., the strike group begins to reshape the battle space without looking like it's doing anything at all. Not with sudden turns, not with obvious speed changes, with subtle geometry. Escorts adjust spacing by fractions of a mile. A destroyer widens slightly. A cruiser shifts by a degree or two. Tiny changes that look meaningless on surface radar, but underwater they alter the entire acoustic map. Bearing lines, baffles, convergence zones, and the time it takes to react if something becomes real. The undersea contacts respond. Not dramatically, not with panic. They correct, staying aligned. That confirmation is the most important evidence so far. It proves awareness. It proves intention. Whoever is below is not lost, not confused, not drifting. They are interacting. At 03:46 a.m., the mood inside the carrier's command spaces becomes razor-focused. Still calm, still controlled, but fully awake. No one shouts, no one sprints. Because this isn't the explosive kind of danger. This is the slow kind, the kind where nothing happens until suddenly something does. And the most dangerous phase is often the quietest. By 03:52 a.m., the geometry tightens. The contacts are no longer distant uncertainties. They occupy positions that matter. One off a forward bearing, one offset to a flank, one hanging back with patience. It doesn't look like an attack posture. It looks like a test. Testing reactions. Testing thresholds. Testing whether the carrier strike group will ping, launch, broadcast, or maneuver. A gray zone probe. The U.S. Navy doesn't respond emotionally. It responds doctrinally. At 03:55 a.m., anti-submarine warfare teams are moved from observation to readiness quietly. Aircraft crews on an escort ship are alerted, not launched. Sonobuoy inventory is checked, not deployed. Dipping sonar systems are staged, not activated. Everything is prepared. Nothing is revealed. This is restraint as a weapon. At 04:02 a.m., the second contact makes a choice that reveals limitation. It slows slightly, just enough to change closure behavior. That matters. A submarine on batteries cannot sprint forever. It cannot hover in perfect position indefinitely without spending power. Slowing while maintaining geometry suggests the commander is counting minutes and weighing risk. The strike group holds course, holds speed, holds silence. Silence, when used correctly, forces the other side to move first. And in undersea warfare, the first side to move wrong is the first side to lose. At 04:06 a.m., the first contact briefly rises a few meters in depth, small enough to be cautious, large enough to be detectable in the data. It's likely trying to regain an acoustic advantage, or to adjust for a changing thermal layer. But it's also a sign of work being done down there. Constant corrections. Constant calculation. These are not amateurs. At 04:09 a.m., the command team's decision window narrows. If the subs press closer, reaction time shrinks. If the U.S. pings too early, it escalates. If the U.S. does nothing forever, it invites risk. So the response chosen is not loud. It is layered. At 04:11 a.m., an escort ship, quietly without theatrics, prepares to launch an MH-60 Seahawk. The deck stays dark. No spotlight. No unnecessary radio chatter, just the controlled choreography of professionals preparing a tool designed for one purpose, to remove ambiguity. Helicopters compress time. They can drop sonobuoys, dip sonar, mark positions, and build an acoustic picture faster than any ship can alone. And most importantly, they signal to the submarine commander something that changes the psychological balance instantly. You are being watched by layers, not just by one hull. At 04:14 a.m., one of the contacts makes the first real mistake. It's not dramatic. It's not a loud cavitation burst. But on sonar, Even small errors speak loudly. A brief transient spike, an imperfection in acoustic discipline, could be a momentary machinery adjustment, a control surface correction, a battery load shift, a tiny bubble trail. It lasts seconds, but it's enough. In the Combat Direction Center, the response is immediate, not emotional, not triumphant. Precise. That anomaly provides the final justification for calibrated clarification. At 04:16 a.m., active sonar is authorized, not continuous, not aggressive. One short, narrow beam pulse. Minimal duration, minimal broadcast footprint. Just enough to confirm. The ocean answers. The ambiguous haze becomes a defined contact, bearing, depth band, and relative position snapping into clarity like a map coming into focus. For the first time in this encounter, the U.S. Navy doesn't just suspect, it knows. And more importantly, the submarines now know the U.S. knows. That moment changes everything. Because in undersea competition, detection isn't merely tactical, it's psychological. It tells the shadow that the room they thought was dark has lights. Almost immediately, the closest contact shifts depth, slipping downward, attempting to break the acoustic conditions that allowed the strike group to hold it. A smart move. But it's late, because once the ambiguity is broken, layered tracking begins. At 04:19 a.m., the Seahawk lifts. No show, no drama, just rotors cutting night air, a silhouette rising over black water. From above, the helicopter crew begins building the next layer of reality, deploying passive sonobuoys at measured spacing. Enough to map, not enough to provoke. The pattern isn't a net meant to trap, it's a grid meant to understand. At 04:22 a.m., the second submarine, still quiet, adjusts course. It doesn't charge, it doesn't flee in panic, it turns away slowly, carefully, testing whether the U.S. response will intensify. It doesn't. The strike group maintains speed. Escorts keep subtle geometry. The Seahawk holds position. The message is simple. We're not escalating beyond what you force. But we are not blind. At 04:24 a.m., the third contact reveals its own limitation. It increases speed slightly. Another small tell. Battery power is now being spent for separation, not for observation. The priorities have shifted. They came to shadow. Now they want distance. The helicopter's presence removes the luxury of hovering in uncertainty. With airborne sensors, the undersea space becomes smaller. The time available to maneuver without consequence becomes shorter. At 04:27 a.m., the strike group's tracking picture stabilizes. The subs are still there, still detectable, but the geometry is dissolving. The surrounding posture that looked deliberate is now thinning into escape routes. That's the outcome in the gray zone. You don't always win with an explosion. You win by forcing the other side to abandon the position they wanted while keeping your own posture steady and lawful. At 04:30 a.m., the closest contact is opening range. Not sprinting. Diesel-electric boats can't sprint silently for long, but steadily increasing separation, moving toward deeper water where acoustic conditions are less favorable for quick tracking. The Seahawk follows the doctrine. Observe, record, confirm, without chasing into escalation. At 04:33 a.m., active sonar is secured. The helicopter holds its pattern long enough to ensure the withdrawal is real, not a feint. Then it turns back. On the surface, the carrier strike group never changed its identity. It never looked afraid. It never looked aggressive. It did not surge forward or swing hard away. It simply revealed that the water around it is structured, layered, controlled. At 04:38 a.m., the three submarines are no longer surrounding. They are departing, still present in data, still tracked at distance, but no longer compressing decision time. And that is the boundary that matters. By 04:42 a.m., the immediate pressure is over. The Seahawk recovers to its ship. Sonar teams secure the most sensitive logs. Analysts align timestamps across platforms. Every bearing change, every depth adjustment, every transient spike is preserved. Because in modern naval competition, the aftermath often matters more than the moment. What gets logged becomes leverage later, diplomatically, strategically, doctrinally. At dawn, the Caribbean looks unchanged. The water is calm. The sky lightens. USS George Washington continues its transit as if the night passed without incident. That, too, is deliberate. Professional forces don't celebrate quiet victories. They document them. The three submarines did not fire. They did not violate the letter of international law. They operated in the gray space where presence is deniable and intent is arguable. But strategically, the conclusion is clear. They came close enough to test boundaries, close enough to map behavior, close enough to believe silence would protect them. What they learned instead is harder to ignore. Silence is fragile near layered defenses. Proximity cuts both ways. And a carrier strike group does not need to chase to dominate. The U.S. Navy response was not designed to humiliate. It was designed to clarify, to demonstrate that restraint governs action, but awareness governs everything else. If the submarines had pressed closer, the response would have tightened. If they had made more noise, the clarification would have come sooner. If the strike group had reacted emotionally, the encounter could have escalated into a public standoff in minutes. Instead, doctrine held, discipline held. The situation ended the way modern maritime competition often does, not with a headline, with separation. And in the undersea domain, separation is the loudest statement of all, because the side that can hold course, hold silence, and still reveal the shadow without firing a shot, controls the moment when neither side wants to be the first to cross the line. And tonight, that's exactly what happened.